Hey, greetings, everyone. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West here, the Executive Director of the American Constitutional Rights Union and the ACRU Action Fund. And welcome to this episode of Live Free TV. And first and foremost, I just want to say Merry Christmas to each and every one of you and a Happy New Year as well. Well, I think it will be a Happy New Year. There are some really interesting things going on, especially when we look at this time right now, which is supposed to be a transition period from an outgoing administration into an incoming administration. And there have been some very questionable things and almost some things that will seemingly unconstitutional that are going on right now. But I think it's very important we kind of get a perspective of how, well, the outgoing president, Joe Biden, actually felt about the new incoming president, Trump, number 47. Roll the tape.
These are the kind of guys you like to smack in the ass.
Well, perhaps that is not a literal thing that outgoing President Joe Biden feels, but I think that figuratively, that's some of the things he's looking at. When you think about the decisions that President Biden has made with foreign policy, the fact that he has granted the permission for Ukraine to fire surface-to-surface ATACMS missiles from Ukraine into Russia. Now, why would he have not allowed them to do that in these previous years up until this point? This creates a very interesting foreign policy dilemma for the Trump administration coming in. And it puts us on a very interesting war footing when it comes to the aggression that's being shown toward Russia. Not trying to say I'm a friend of Russia, because I think that there are consequences and ramifications for attacking a sovereign nation and seeking to usurp their territory and overtake it, as well as killing their civilians in a purposeful and intentional manner. But shouldn't there have been some type of coordination between the current administration and the incoming administration on such a major foreign policy decision? As a matter of fact, Donald Trump has already named his national security advisor, which is former Army Lieutenant Colonel, I believe Lieutenant Colonel, and that's Michael Waltz, who is also a member of Congress from the state of Florida. Maybe Jake Sullivan should have had a sit down and talk to him about this and get the feeling of where would the incoming Trump administration believe that they should make this action or should not take this action. Those are the type of things that you kind of ask yourself in this transition period. Why is the Biden administration making these kind of very important decisions? There's another decision that the Biden administration has made, which kind of puts the incoming administration in an interesting position as well. The current Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration, has gone into a contractual agreement with federal government employees. Now, one of the things, without a doubt, the President of the United States of America is the chief executive officer of the executive branch, the federal government. But the Biden administration going into an agreement saying with federal government employees that you can stay home and not come into work for the next 5 years. Is that really something that is constitutional? Is that really something that an outgoing president should be able to do? And should it be able to stand in a transition period when a new commander-in-chief, a new president is coming in? Because the thing you have to ask yourself is that, when you start to talk about federal government unions, collective bargaining of federal government employees, well, they're collectively bargaining with the American taxpayer dollar. And truthfully, they are responsible to the American taxpayer because we're the ones that are working to pay their compensation. So it's interesting to me how you always see and hear about the federal government employees, members of Congress and whatever, saying you cannot shut down the federal government. But yet, how was it that the federal government or government at other levels would tell private sector organizations that they must shut down? They must send their employees home. But yet, the average, everyday American citizen, they're not allowed to make those type of decisions about the government that they work to pay for their operations, their existence, their compensation. So I think it's a really important question because some people are saying that, what the Biden-Harris administration is doing is trying to solidify things to, quote unquote, Trumpify them against the incoming administration. But really, constitutionally, can this current Biden-Harris administration tell federal government employees for the next 5 years, you don't have to come into work? I don't think that that's something that they can stand up to challenge because that agreement was not made with the new president is coming in. And furthermore, if the president is to be set that an outgoing administration can establish a contractual agreement with government employees that the subsequent administration must respect and honor, then how does that change things going forward in the executive branch of the United States of America? So I think it's really important that when you hear Joe Biden talk about smacking someone, he is really trying to do these things in a manner by which he can prevent or undermine the incoming Trump administration. And when you look at this new commission on government efficiency, which is already starting to meet, the caucus of the government efficiency is starting to meet, I don't think that this can hold up even in a court, because what right does the outgoing president have to say that you don't have to come into work, you don't have to show up and justify your compensation that the American taxpayers are paying for? So stay tuned, because I think this really is a huge constitutional issue for what binds an incoming chief executive officer, what binds an incoming commander in chief, what binds an incoming president of the United States of America. And without a doubt, this is a spiteful, vindictive, highly hyper-partisan move by the Biden-Harris administration. And I think it is trying to solidify the support of these federal government employees. And oh, by the way, when you look at this past election cycle, 94% of the District of Columbia voted for Vice President Harris and the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz. So what does that tell you? Seems to be a little political favoritism going on. And who out there in the American public believes that they should be held to a different standard as far as going into work than the federal government employees that they have to go to work to pay taxes for? Another thing that is very questionable and somewhat a constitutional issue in this transition period from the Biden-Harris administration to the Trump-Vance administration is this whole thing about the border wall materials. And I'm here in Texas, and I've seen these border wall materials. They can still be used. I think one of the excuses that the Biden administration is putting out there is that they're unusable, they're rotting, things of that nature. Well, that's okay. Let's refurbish them. But these border wall materials are things that have already been appropriated. The American taxpayer has seen their dollars going toward those things being purchased. And now the Biden administration is coming in and selling these materials for pennies on the dollar. $5 for an entire panel. Now, first and foremost, who are they selling these materials to? And the proceeds by which they are receiving for the selling of these materials, are they going back into the coffers? The coffers that the American taxpayer said that we give our resources so that we can have the sovereignty of our country protected. What type of administration, outgoing, would continue to say we do not want to see the protection of this constitutional republic? This is one of the most important and critical issues in this November 2024 election. And now we have the Biden-Harris administration, and President Trump is on record now asking Joe Biden to stop doing exactly what he's doing. Let's see whether or not Joe Biden stops. Let's see whether or not Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House spokesperson, answers the question, or even if the media does ask the question, why is President Biden doing this, first and foremost? Oh, by the way, where is Vice President Harris? Last time I heard, she was in Hawaii. Of course, we saw that somewhat delusional video. And we know that the current president of the United States of America in the middle of the week is heading to Delaware. So who's in charge? Who made the decision that these materials should be sold off in the first place? I mean, was this something that went through Congress for approval? Was this one of those executive decisions that was made, even though, again, these are materials that have already been purchased by the American taxpayer for the sole intent and purpose of protecting our sovereignty? So I think that this whole transition period leads us to ask a lot of questions about what exactly is the Biden-Harris administration doing, foreign policy-wise, What are they doing as far as our domestic tranquility, which is taken from the preamble of the Constitution of the United States of America to protect us, our life, our liberty, our property? And what is going on with this granting to the government employees the ability to stay at home and not come into work for the next 5 years? It's kind of like these pardons that President Biden is offering out there that are just blanket pardons that cover an entire period, from this year to that year. In the case of his son Hunter, about a 10-year period. There are a lot of things that this administration is doing on the way out that ask us, is this constitutional? But it's not just the Democrats. Let's start talking about and thinking about what's the way forward for this Republican Congress? Because the American people made a decision. They said to the Republicans, here's the Senate. They said to the Republicans, here's the House of Representatives. Not very big, grandiose majorities, but it is still a majority. And it's very interesting, the assessment of one outgoing senator from Utah, Mitt Romney. Roll the tape.
Oh, MAGA is the Republican Party, and Donald Trump is the Republican Party today. That is what the Republican Party is. And will the party need to change? Look, the Republican Party has become the party of the working class, middle class voter. And you've got to give Donald Trump credit for having done that, taken that away from the Democrats. Democrats pushed him out. All right. The Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren faction of the Democrat Party with some of this, defund the police and transgenders and, biological males in women's sports. These things had a lot of people in the middle class just flee the Democratic Party. They're now Republicans. Now, one of the challenges in my party is that our policies do not necessarily line up with the interests of our voters. And so there'll be some reorientation that's going to be necessary in my party. The Democrat Party is the one in trouble. I don't know how they recover. I'm not going to tell them what to do because I would begin to have the capacity to do so. But they've lost their base. Union guys and gals have left the Democratic Party and are voting Republican. And the Democratic Party is seen not as rich people, but as college professors and woke scolds. And that's not an attractive feature.
No truer words have ever been said. Congratulations. Thank you, Senator Mitt Romney, for saying those things. But it is an important onus that is now on the Republicans, because we do remember back in 2017, when Donald Trump in his first 45th administration, he had the House, he had the Senate. He had Mitch McConnell as the Senate Majority Leader. He had Paul Ryan as the House Speaker, but they were not on the same sheet of music. And I think that you do see a mandate from the American people to go out there and do what is necessary to fix the economy, get the prices down, get the oil and gas prices down, to restore our energy independence, to make sure that our border is secure, that we don't have these criminal illegal immigrants that are out here murdering, raping, assaulting American citizens, like we saw in the case of Lake and Raleigh, like we saw in the case here in Texas of Jocelyn Nungare. But I think also it is a call to make sure that we do have a federal government that is responsible, fiscally responsible. And so when you look again, coming back to what we initially talked about with the Biden-Harris administration selling off these border wall materials, Republicans right from the beginning have to start getting on board with making sure that we do have strong security of our borders. And I don't understand how the Democrats could believe that this is a winning issue, to continue to thumb their nose at the American people and say that we support the criminal illegal immigrant population that is here in the United States of America. Governors like Pritzker in Illinois saying that you have to go through me to get to my people. Governors like Phil Murphy in New Jersey saying that over my dead body will you come in and remove people from the state of New Jersey. We're talking about people that, number one, they're here illegally. Number two, they're criminal elements. Who does not want to see Trinidad gone? MS-13 gone. Who does not want to make sure that our streets are safe and free from these criminal illegal immigrant populations? Even in Chicago, we see that in the black community they're rising up against the black mayor of Chicago, Mayor Brandon Johnson, a very far left socialist Democrat, who is saying that he is not going to work with the Trump administration to deport these criminal elements. So I think that as we go through this transition period, it's very interesting to see the actions of the Democrat Party, because I don't know, and I don't think they really understood what happened on November the 5th of 2024. I don't know if they got the memo. And if they continue to go down the path of doing these things that are questionable, maybe even unconstitutional, in the light of what is going to come around come the 3rd or 4th of January next year, when a new Congress is sworn in, and then on the 20th of January when a new president is sworn in, it's going to be a very interesting time for them if they continue to be obstructionists against the mandate of what people have laid out. And especially if they continue to align themselves with cultural, academic, political, entertainment elites. That's what we saw going through this election cycle. So I think it's very important when we talk about our constitutional rights that Republicans and this Trump administration get back to what I have always termed constitutional governance. You look at our rule of law and make sure that our rule of law applies to each and every person. But most importantly, our rule of law applies to the operations of the federal government as well. Those things that are not the duties and responsibilities mandated, enumerated to the federal government, well, they're reserved to the states and to the people. That's why we have the 10th Amendment, the very last amendment in our Bill of Rights, 1 through 10. And I think that's what the focus has to be for the Department of Government Efficiency, and Republicans have to be on board with that. It'll be very interesting to see the very first budget that the Trump administration puts out there, because it should show the aspirational goal of where they want to take this federal government. We should start to see the decrease in the spending of the federal government. Yes, the Trump administration and Trump 45, they had a pretty good little chunk of spending, but it can be attributed in a way big fashion to what happened with COVID. But still, it pales in comparison to the $7 trillion, maybe closer to $7.5 or $8 trillion by the time we're finished with the Biden-Harris administration of new spending, which caused the runaway inflation that we saw that hit an all-time high of 9.1%. So when you look at the Republicans on Capitol Hill, as we go through this transition period and we await for a new Congress to come in next January, it is so important that they start to align themselves, as Senator Romney talked about. Their policies have to be in alignment with the policies of the Trump administration, unlike what we saw back in 2017, which led to the Republicans losing the House and the Senate in Trump's midterm election cycle, his first one. So stand by. We'll be watching, because I think it's so important that we have that constitutional governance that protects your constitutional rights, your life, your liberty, your property, your pursuit of happiness. And that's the focus of the American Constitutional Rights Union. And we ask you to continue to follow us at theacru.org, and make sure you join with us. Not just because there's an election cycle that's over. You should be joining with us each and every day. And remember that next year is the 250th anniversary of some very momentous events in the history of these United States of America. Battles of Lexington, battles of Concord, battles of Bunker Hill. The establishment of our Army, our Navy, and our Marine Corps all happened in 1775. And we have to remember those events because they were the precursors to our 250th remembrance and anniversary as the longest running constitutional republic that the world has ever known, which will happen on July the 4th of 2026. So we are at an incredible stage in the life cycle of these United States of America. And it's important that we stand by and we honor the Constitution of the United States of America. God bless you all.